Folks, we're back. Let's look at chapter number 2, Disposition of the Dead. Disposal of dead human remains. So a dead body, also known as a corpse, is a body of a human being deprived of life but not entirely disintegrated. So in our review, we've seen that there are parts to sentences, parts to things that lawyers look at when determining whether something legally applies or does not. So if we look at this definition, we can separate it into constituent parts. The first one is body of a human being, correct? If we do not have the body of a human being, we are not dealing with corpses or human remains. The second part is it deprived of life. If a person is still living, they're not a dead body. It would, rack our common sense, but you have to explain that as a lawyer. You have to. And then the third part, not yet entirely disintegrated. So it can't be dust. It can't be obliterated. We have to look at the entire legal definition. And there's the explanation. So bones of a skeleton. We have a skeleton, not a dead body, a skeleton, because it's disintegrated. The body itself is gone, the remnants are there. Cremated remains are not a dead body. They're remains. One of the terms used is cremains, okay? Cremains. But I like to use cremated remains. Cremated remains. A dead body is not an everlasting thing. After undergoing an undefined degree of decomposition, it ceases to be a dead body in the eyes of the law. So what that statement says is that when a person dies, they do not remain a dead body forever. At some point in time, they cease being a dead body and they become a skeleton, cremated remains, something different. It evolves. In the past, death occurs when life ceases, in which the heart stops and respiration ends. For medical and legal purposes, death is the irreversible cessation of all functioning of the brain, including the brainstem. Okay? Everything in the brain is dead. And we will cover, for the most part, how a person dies in your embalming classes, the agonal period. It's one of the early chapters in the book. But for the purposes of this class, the instant the brain dies, including the brainstem, you have death. So what is the legal status of a dead body? Believe it or not, this is argued. This is argued a lot. Originally, it was considered to be under exclusive control of the church. Okay? It was said that a dead body is the property of no one, and there is no property in a dead body. And this is talking about property rights, concepts of ownership and use of an object. So if I have in my hand a pen, it is owned by someone, and it is considered property. I can bequeath it to someone. I can gift it to someone. I can trust it to someone, where I hold the beneficial title and I give the legal title to someone else. Well, with the no property theory, which is what we have here, it belongs to no one, and it has no property rights. With the church, that was considered a concept of spirituality, so to speak. That which belongs to God belongs to God. When a person dies, the body is now under the jurisdiction of the church. Well, obviously, as people kind of evolve in time, we start thinking more about this matter. Things change. Time progressed. Courts decided that a surviving spouse and next of kin do have a right to take possession and arrange disposal. Okay? It stopped short of saying that it was property of the family, which is the property theory, that it is no different than any other object out there. And the current theory is that it is quasi-property. It has quasi-property rights. We've seen quasi-contract back in contract law. Now we're looking at quasi-property. So what does that mean? It means that it is not property that we can own and trade like anything else. Okay? It's a bundle of rights associated with an item. You can have this for the purpose of doing this specific item with it, or this specific task with it. Sounds a lot like a bailment, doesn't it? But it's kind of not, because you do not have someone granting you possession. It's weird like that, isn't it? So, the survivor, okay, the person in charge, which we will look at legal next of kin, trust me, okay? They're given the right to take the body for the purpose of disposing of it, to allow body parts to be used within the confines of the law, things like the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, to exclude from possession of the body. If I have the quasi-property rights, I have the power of disposition, I can supersede anybody else, well-established rule, and to actually dispose of the body. If any of these fails, look at what the type of problems you can run into. If you do not have the right to take custody of the body, possession of the body for disposition, someone can hold it, and then it throws a kink into everything else. Well, what if you don't have the authority to allow parts of it to be used in the confines of the law? Someone else might supersede and thus causing problems. What if everyone in your class had a right to the body? You'd be fighting over who can do what with it. That does happen. That does happen. And finally, you have to have the power to dispose of it. If you have the custody to take possession for purposes of disposition, but then don't have the ability to actually dispose of the body, that's kind of a problem. You're stuck with this corpse until someone else tells you to dispose of it. And we've already seen that under police power, the government, the state itself, can kind of regulate activity. Well, yeah, they have plenty of inherent power to control the disposition of the dead, especially under a concept of protecting the public health. Okay? Societies recognize that health and safety concerns, public morality, necessitate the disposition of the dead by regulated methods. And states have created criminal statutes, okay, regarding disposition of the dead by regulated method. Book refers to an example where a body was left in a trunk of a car and the car was abandoned. States said, hey, the law prohibits a person to throw away or abandon any dead human body or any portion thereof in any place other than where it should be under the appropriate certificate. And what do you think the family said? I didn't dispose of a body. I disposed of a car. The fact the body was in the car is irrelevant. Honestly, that's exactly what they did. I disposed of a car. Obviously, that did not play so well in the court. And the court certainly said that, yeah, this is totally constitutional. You know, general welfare. We're trying to protect the public here. So, you throwing a body anywhere you want, we're going to say you can't do that. And that's protected at the constitutional level. There are also statutes which impose criminal penalties for the failure to bury or incinerate a corpse within a reasonable time after death, which have been applied to funeral directors. Tri-State Crematory in Georgia was a situation like this. Over 300 bodies were discarded, not cremated. And guess what? Georgia law could not believe that this could ever occur. And you cannot accuse someone of a crime if the crime does not exist. So civil actions destroyed the Tri-State Crematory, destroyed the funeral establishments involved with them, but criminal acts, that was hard. So Georgia law had to change to accommodate this new level of inherent human stupidity that it did not prior foresee happening. So how can we get rid of bodies? What are the common ways to kind of put this to the wind? The most common, inhumant or ground burial. Generally, it's done in a public or private cemetery. And understand, it can be done anywhere as long as you have the permission to do it. We've seen people that are buried in zoos, longtime employees of zoos. We've seen people that are buried on their own property with the proper permitting. Okay? So in cemeteries, public or private, generally it's okay anytime. You pay the cemetery, you know, pay the opening and closing, sign the paperwork, boom, done. But if you want to do it somewhere else, it's a bit more complicated, but it does not mean it can't be done. Entombment, which is the above-ground placement of a body in a crypt or a mausoleum. I know the book says mausoleum crypt, and I kind of left it that way. But know that there are two different things. A mausoleum is kind of the more private family structure, right? And then the individual spaces within a mausoleum might be considered a crypt, but above ground placement. And you can even have the body indefinitely preserved. So you have Mao Zedong in China, Vladimir Lenin in Russia, Eva Perón in Latin America, a bunch of saints. They don't really do that to Pope, but for the most part, you know, you can have them entombed above ground for that, if you're creepy like that. Cremation, okay. Crematories need to be properly licensed and in compliance with all local and state laws. Older editions of the book state it's not technically a method of disposition, but one step in a means of disposition. It kind of throws things off there. I don't really agree with that. Under the most recent edition, 2011, it states that provided the crematory is properly licensed and in compliance with state and local laws, the cremation of bodies is a perfectly legal form of disposition, and that is the accepted view. Cremation is a mode of disposition. Now, cremation involves several steps, but cremation, the entire process, is considered a form of disposition. So make sure if you got a used book that you correct that. Remains or cremains are placed in an urn, another container, and then disposed of by burial, interment, or scattering. That was the disposition. Okay, in the old book, once you disposed of the cremated remains, you had disposition. Well, the reason why that fails completely, can you figure that one out? I'll give you 2 or 3 seconds. So the reason why it makes no sense that a lawyer would say something in one area in the book and then something here is because we've already seen the disposition involves death. And if you recall the definition of a dead body, it had to be human remains, deprived of life, not entirely disintegrated. Well, fact of the matter is, at this point, we're not disposing of a body, we're disposing of cremated remains. So the disposition of the body was the cremation, which is why in the older editions it doesn't quite make sense that you would say that cremation is not the disposition, except the disposition of the cremated remains. So the book goes on to state, it must be noted that cremation is not technically a method of disposition, but a single step. The steps are as follows. You load the human remains, the dead body, into the chamber. Okay, so dead body present. It is cremated. Then the bones and cremated remains are removed. Metallic objects are removed as best as possible. The bones, cremated remains are processed into a powder, and then it's disposed of by burial, interment, scattering, etc., etc. And you can see why that I kind of disagree with what he's saying, and so do some, I would say most of the states, including the Cremation Association of North America, that once the body is disposed of, that is a mode of disposition. Whether cremation is several steps or whatever, what you do with the cremated remains is something different than what you've done with the dead body. Scattering is usually confined to scattering gardens or open sea, so this is scattering of cremated remains. Open sea requires 3 nautical miles from the shoreline. Reports of scattering must be filed with the Environmental Protection Agency, and the government has restricted some scattering locations. Generally, rule of thumb, and I would say this would be true for both state of Florida and state of New York, is that scattering in inland waterways, scattering on personal or government property without permission is prohibited. So if someone wants to go down to the dock and chuck them off the back, generally that is prohibited under most state laws. And burial at sea involves a whole body, okay, not just dropping an urn in the ocean. Maritime law permits the captain of a ship on the high seas may dispose of a body if the captain believes it's in the best interest of safety for the crew and passengers. So when we're looking at law, you know, it said that it derived from the common law. Some elements even come from maritime law, something like this, okay? And on the high sea, captain is almighty. Captain can marry someone. Captain can cast someone over the side for mutiny or for other reasons. So the case study presented in the book is interesting. A person dies at sea 6 days from shore, and the captain disposed of the body by casting it overboard. Widow then sues the cruise line, and the judge ruled that, boo-hoo, perfectly legal. Captain is embarking on a cruise. When a person embarks on a cruise, they implicitly agree to all the customs of maritime law. And it did not matter even if the widow didn't know that the person died. How crappy is that? You go to the doctor, pick up your old boy, and yeah, by the way, can you step aside here for a second? Got to tell you some bad news. That just sounds crappy. Generally, burial on inland waterways is prohibited. And again, we're talking about taking a body in a casket and dumping it in a river. I know the mob does that, and the government, for the most part, frowns upon the mafia doing it. Okay? There are regulations and guidelines that must be obeyed regarding burial in water. Casket must be weighted, holes dug, or holes bored through it, and reports must be made to the EPA. And generally, when you are dealing with a burial at sea, you're usually disposing of it via the U.S. Navy. Okay, it's usually a veteran that is going in the ocean, and the Navy has guidelines which explain all this to you. Very, very specific. Donation to science. We're going to cover donation a bit more under Universal Gift Act in another chapter. But realistically, law recognizes that when you donate a body, it's a means of disposition. You lose the custody rights and anything associated with the body. It becomes the quasi-property of the medical institution receiving it for the purposes of scientific research and whatever else. And away it goes. And when we're dealing with donation to science, understand that we've seen dead body and corpse, which is a legal term, and now we're introduced to the word cadaver, which specifically refers to a dead body that is used for scientific research, science purposes, however you want to look at it. So corpse and cadaver are synonymous in as much as it refers to a dead body, but understand cadaver is for science, not for legal purposes, and corpse is the legal term for a dead body. That is important. So in the modern tellings of the book, editions of the book, it talks about alkaline hydrolysis. There are different names for this. Some places refer to it as water cremation. Some people refer to it as biocremation. I believe that's a trade name more than it is whatever. But the process is called alkaline hydrolysis. And the body is subjected to chemicals, water, and heat, which cause the body to decompose rapidly until only skeletal remains are left. They're then processed and placed into an urn. And the process is similar to cremation. Overall, you place the body in the chamber, it does its thing, you take the stuff out, and away you go. There are some benefits to this over standard cremation. Plenty of literature out there. I encourage you to kind of look it up. Gilligan states that neither form of cremation is a means of disposition in and of itself. Probably most educators out there, disagree with that completely. Again, because of the definition of a dead body. And when you dispose of the dead body, that is the disposition of it. So the concept that he's argue defies my logic. For the purposes of this class, by Florida law, I haven't quite looked at the New York statute regarding alkaline hydrolysis, so I'm not going to make a definitive concept there. But for the purposes of the course, the national board exam, and a lot of other things, I would say that this is a valid form of disposition because of the fact that the body has been disposed of. And you should always comment on any question that if it says cremation is considered final disposition or not. The overwhelming majority viewpoint of everyone out there is that yes, it is a means of disposition. So the American Board provides schools curriculum guidelines of things we need to teach, and it says other methods. I assume they mean things like exposure to elements under Zoroastrianism. It's non-traditional, okay? And basically what that is something called sky burial, if you've heard of it. You could Google it, pretty graphic pictures. Basically the body, in some cases it is dismembered, in some cases just left in nature, and basically the critters eat you. Obviously in the United States we would have some moral issues with that, but that has been a long practiced tradition in that particular religion. So what might be moral or immoral to us might also be legal or illegal, okay? There are some places, there are some, I believe, Native American tribes that practice, quote-unquote, sky burial. So within their jurisdictions, that would be accepted behavior. You try to do that, right off of Fifth Avenue, and people are probably going to be a little upset with you. I'm just saying. So, folks, thank you for your attention. Next, we'll be looking at Chapter 3.